So, now we continue with the next subject from the Data Act. And as we know, the Data Act tried to address the issue with competitive cloud services. It is my greatest pleasure that Francesco Bonfiglio, from the CEO of the Gaia-X Association, is next to me. He arrived extra for this event from Milano. He is going to tell us a bit regarding the prestige industrial project that is everywhere in the room. We have discussed Gaia-X already on the second event, on the first day. And there is a special opportunity to ask him some question. The moderation will be made by my dear colleague Rebecca Weiss from Bitkom. But now, please, Francesco, the floor is yours. And where are we now with Gaia-X?
Thank you, Pancho. And if you don't mind, can I stand up?
Please, yeah.
Because I've been sitting all time. And first of all, given you told me you've been talking about Gaia-X, I don't want to be the elephant in the room, so I hope I will be able to give you a little bit of oversight. And I would like to leave you a few messages. I will not bother you too much, I hope, but leaving a few messages on what is Gaia-X, why we're doing it, and where we are, of course. So let me start from the relationship between Gaia-X and the European data strategy, which you have been talking about in these days. Gaia-X is a completely private initiative. That's the first point I want to highlight. Extremely important because we are a bunch of European and non-European companies, small, medium, large, huge, from many nationalities, from the user side, users of technology, of course, and provider side of technology, and academics and research institution, working for free, supporting the association with our own money of subscription, and developing something we believe into. But accidentally, or I wouldn't say by design, because this was not the case, our mission is exactly in line with the one of Europe. So let me try to highlight in a few elements, the key elements of this European strategy. First of all, back in February 2020, we heard about the message from President von der Leyen about the need for a European data strategy. So basically, the intent of building a new market of data in Europe. In 2020, we all know what happened. We've been talking about the pandemics. And of course, the pandemics created a lot of disruption and a lot of awareness, if we should really look into the bright side of it. But one important thing that happened was that the usual central investments that used to come from the European Commission have been distributed to member countries through the recovery funds. This was a significant step because it means that every member state will be in charge of defining their plans for digital transformation as well. And there is just two voices in the RRF that have a minimum threshold of 20%, which is digital and green, which means a lot. So digital and green are put at the same level of importance when it gets to the future of Europe, let me say. But of course, digital is pervasive, so there is no sector from agriculture to industrial that will not be transformed through digitalization. But anyway, this is a great message. We have 750 billion euro, 20% minimum has to be invested in digital, so 150 billion euros. This is unprecedented. In October 2020, all the member states declared their intention to build a common European cloud, if you want, a common European computing continuum. This is exactly the term. And the Digital Decade Strategy, announced in March 2020, together with a digital compass that focuses on the key areas of digitalization, stated this need into more detailed objectives. So let's try to highlight, there is two key elements of this strategy. One is the data strategy, which aims to build common data spaces. Why we need common data spaces? Because the future of digital economy, and I would say the future of the real economy of Europe, which is not just for the IT business, is driven by data. And the only way to build value in any supply chain, in any data value chain, this is the way it is called today, is to get together or exchange the data across all the actors building that value. Let me make a simple example. We've been talking about ESG, environmental sustainability governance. There is no way to define ESG unless you collect the data from all the actors across a supply chain, because you cannot calculate the carbon footprint, you cannot calculate the amount of recycling material you're using. There is no way. So this is a simple example of the many disruptions that will come in the next years that can only be achieved through the exchange of data. Now, the second element is to have quality data, and this is another important point I wanted to make. Europe will never win the battle of competitivity in the world if we want to compete in the world. Somebody believed that we need to compete in Europe only. Personally, I believe this is nonsense. But if we want to be competitive in the world, we need to be aware of two facts. We will never win the battle of labor costs. There's no way that European labor costs will compete in the world. And we will never win the battle of raw material costs. But there is one raw material Europe has the highest quality in the world. This is data. Why? Because we have the largest and by far the most complex ecosystems in every sector. Think about the complexity of our healthcare systems, or the quality of our automotive industry, or the complexity and articulation of our agriculture, our environment, our education, and think about transportation, think about languages, the cultures that make up this fantastic continent. So we have gold in our mind. The third element is that we need to have commonly agreed upon rules to exchange data, because data were there since ever. Why they haven't been exchanged? Because there were no common rules to trust on. And of course, these rules must comply and be in line with European values and principles. Now, another key element, a key pillar of the digital transformation of Europe is the Digital Decade program. So the objective of this digital decade is the achievement by 2030 of a computing continuum. What does that mean? It means that data are spread all over. And now the paradigm has to change. Instead of bringing data to the compute or collecting data like in the ocean and try to put them in your swimming pool, the biggest is your swimming pool. You will never be able, because we're talking about the ocean. So we need to bring the compute to the data, which means we need to create a continuum, seamless stream between end data, which comes from our handheld, to the edge, to the far edge, to the edge, to the data centers close to those data, and the central cloud and the central data centers that we have now, they dominate in the market. So this objective will see more than 10,000 edge point connected by 2030, and an uptake to 75% of the cloud adoption in Europe. This is incredibly important, because why we have an objective to achieve 75% of cloud adoption? Because nowadays we are 26%. So before we talk about how to exploit the data, let's be aware of one incredibly important factor. We have no data availability, because 80% of our data and applications are not in the cloud. 80% of our applications are not cloud native. So we're kind of closing the doors of our data mines. And first of all, or the Latins used to say, primus vivere, we need to bring the data where we can exploit them. So this is the objectives of the European data strategy. And if you group them together, on the left side, actually on the right side for you, we have the common data space objective. So create common data spaces. On the left side, we have the objective to create common cloud rulebook, a common, let me say, way to manage cloud platforms. And to achieve that, there is some high-impact projects, one of which is called the CIS. It's an important project for common European interest to develop a brand new European cloud infrastructure. Now, Gaia-X is completely independent, is not driven by the European Commission, is not funded by any member state, but has got exactly the same objectives. It started in 2019 as a governmental initiative from the Ministry of Economy and Energy in Germany. It became Franco-German right after, and then was transformed into a non-profit a non-for-profit association which groups nowadays more than 300 members. On one side, we want to create common data spaces, so use cases where multiple members decide to share, exchange their data to build value for the common good of all of them. And on the other side, we want to build common infrastructures that, through the federation and the creation of transparent, controllable services, enable the data exchange. Because without trusted platform, there would be no data exchanging. So, why Gaia-X? Another key example I want to make. We keep talking about data economy. Do we really know what data economy is about? Data economy is the economy enabled by platform economy. What is platform economy? It's the economy driven by the platforms, which are aggregate of technology that allow to connect multiple sources of data, mesh them up, apply algorithms, create the so-called smart services that are those services that transform a physical ecosystem or an analog ecosystem into something digital. So in that way, we can transform mobility into smart mobility, energy into smart energy, transportation into smart transportation. Now, without this amount of data, this diversity of data, without a flexible capability to collect the data, mesh them up, and apply algorithms, we wouldn't be talking about data economy. We wouldn't be back possibly 20 years ago. Why was this change possible? Because of the cloud. The cloud per se is useless, does not produce an economy. But the cloud is the street where we can run our fast cars. We have fast cars in Germany and in Italy as well, by the way. But we cannot keep them in the garage. No way. So cloud per se is not money, but it's the key enabler. And like I said, we have a big problem of cloud adoption. Second element. What about economy? What are we talking about? What are the numbers? In 2025, the digital economy is going to grow 2 digits year over year, and it's going to reach 950 billion euros. This means 8% of the GDP of Europe. Per se, this means this is a substantial economy. But if you think about it, this is the tip of the iceberg, because this is just the direct economy, which is the sum of the revenues of all the companies in IT, platforms, system integrators, etc. But the iceberg is the elephant in the room, is that nowadays you buy an electric car, a smart fridge, and a smart device, or I don't know, a digital insurance, and you pay it possibly more than the traditional service. Why? Not because it costs more, because it provides more value. It's perceived as providing more value. This means it's an inversion in the traditional economical model. In other words, the price is no more proportional to the cost of production, which includes cost of labor, but it's proportional to the value perceived, the so-called business outcome. Now, it's not my prediction, but I've been confirmed by many economists that in 5 years, so we're not talking about 20 years, the value, so the price value of products will be composed by 50 to 70% by the value produced through the data. So in other words, the digital twin of that product, or the digital add-on, will be the most relevant part of that product. That's why we can win the battle of competitivity, but to do that, we need to work on data and build data products. Now, we may not believe this is a problem, but still, this is the status. So Europe owns 4 to 5% of the total addressable market of the digital economy. This slide shows, it's from 2019. It's not much changed in the last year and this year. It shows the total market capitalization of the listed companies that build data platforms. Now we have, as you can see here, this is a slide from Gartner, so it's not my data. And we have 9 listed companies in Europe. Some of them, by the way, are not more there, but as I said, this is a couple of years old. And they build 4% of the total addressable market. 20 companies in the US make 75%, and another 16 make the 20%. So this slide tells me 3 things. First of all, we are talking about real economy. So in 5 years, our employment, our entrepreneurship, our education, maybe our kids will not study Python in a polytechnic, but they will try to get a certification of one of the dominant platforms. And I don't want this to happen. But the second lesson is that we are feeding other economies with our data, because the raw material comes from Europe. And therefore, we need to do something to change this trend. What can we do? We need to overcome the problem of companies not adopting the cloud. Why this is not happening? Because nowadays the model of cloud is mainly a one-way road. So the awareness in Europe is very high, and companies are scared about adopting the cloud because they are making investments that possibly they would not be able to capitalize if they have no reversibility, switchability, portability. Therefore, we want to have a model of a roundabout where you can choose which provider, you can switch across them, you can move your workload, or you can leave your workloads in different places because they are interoperable. In this way, we can make the freedom of choice and the sovereignty possible that will trigger the trust that data owners need to move their data to the cloud. In other words, we want to move from a model where we let somebody control our data to a model where we get back control on our data. Nowadays, the dominant model is concentrated, hyper-concentrated, the so-called hyperscalers, proprietary, and opaque. Why? Because the model of digital platforms today is the factory model. Like in any manufacturing factory, you have to close the process, optimize it, and introduce the less flexibility possible, otherwise you have no margins. Instead, we want a distributed cloud because data is distributed. We want it open because we want to see exactly what we buy. Like when you buy a bottle of wine or a vegan food, you want to know exactly what's in it, and we want to keep control of it. So we want to decide whether we want to buy vegan food or not, or a service run in France, Italy, Germany, or in Europe, or anywhere in the world. We want to be free and have the trust and sovereignty to exercise our choice. So what is Gaia-X? This is the famous X. On the top of the X, we represent the data spaces. I think I explained what data spaces are the numerical representation of the physical world. So the data you derive from the city, from a hospital, from a healthcare ecosystem, from a factory, is the data space of that physical world. On the bottom side, you have the infrastructures, any sort of infrastructure. We are not building new infrastructure. This is the power of Gaia-X. We are reusing, leveraging, and enhancing what we have. This is the fastest way to competition. And in the middle, these famous yellow boxes here is an abstraction of what we are developing at Gaia-X. They are so-called federation services. So we want to create services that allow to federate several infrastructure points and allow the secure, trusted exchange of data through a common identity management, through common access control, through common inspection of the credential of that services, through a catalog where you can exactly see the service you want and pick and select it, and through compliance services that gives you the assurance that the service you're buying compliant to what you want. We do three things. We specify what I'm explaining, so we produce documents and specifications which are out there on the website. We develop it, so we are developing the so-called reference implementation, which is going to translate into open source software that anyone can use. You can imagine the large companies can write their own stuff. Small, medium business, which is 90% of our market, cannot afford that. We don't want to create another big barrier. We want to create an enabler. And that's why we're producing all the stuff we're doing as an open source code. Three, we are defining the labels. So, like the label of wine, if you buy a bottle of champagne or Chianti or Barolo in Italy, I hope, you will trust the label because you know exactly that that Barolo comes from the best places in the world. And we want to do that with a label that, by the way, will be a technology thing. So where we are, I'm going to close shortly. We started 22 companies in 2020, 11 French, 11 German. So we had 2 countries. Now we are more than 320 members in 25 countries with 15 active hubs and thousands of people working to the same mission. These are the hubs. As you can see, one important thing is that we have a strong participation of the local governments. Like I said, we are not a governmental institution, but there is a lot of interest. So we have a governmental advisory board where the members of the governments and the ministries devoted to digital transformation of those countries sit together, share the exchange, and tell everybody we want to work here and there. And as you can imagine, some needs will be common. So we cluster those needs and make sure that our hubs work together to develop together, joining the best forces across Europe, common data spaces around healthcare, around manufacturing, around automotive, agriculture, and these just a few that have started this year, but many are to come. So the roadmap, and I will pause here. Of course, we have a roadmap, and many people complain that Gaia-X has not delivered anything yet. Well, I've been 30 years in this business, managing large organizations, managing large military projects. So I've worked to the development of the IFA, the Typhoon, the most complex Eurofighter we have on planet Earth, up to or down to small startups. I have never seen in my life nothing serious being born in 1 year. Let's be honest. So anyone who wants this space shuttle to be done in 1 year have no clue of what it takes to do it. But everybody understands we're doing the right thing. So the plan is the following. Year 1 is the setup year. We had 3 objectives. Describe it, start providing the initial drops of those federation services I mentioned before, and start the first projects. We have started 5 projects, one of which, Catena-X, is probably the most advanced, and group together concrete stuff. Volkswagen, Daimler, BMW, Siemens, Bosch, and 100 of players that decided to share their data because none of them could make it alone. That's a real thing. This project is going to disrupt completely the automotive industry in the world. Next year is the adoption year. So we have started the coding phase, so stay tuned. So we are developing MVP, minimum viable products, and we are developing within those projects the initial pieces of the jigsaw, so the software that do all the stuff I'm telling to you. Then we will start the creation of the first federations of cloud service providers, and I'm very keen on that because, of course, we have an X, so we don't need to build just data space projects, but also infrastructure space projects, otherwise it would be a Y and not an X. So we are starting this, and there will be an announcement, I hope, by the end of this year, because a few small, medium players, which, by the way, in their countries maybe are big, but compared to the large giants, they are small, decided to group together and start creating the first federation of infrastructures. Then we will create more projects, and 2023 is the year where the market will take a decision. We will have services in the market, marketplaces, people will see the value, and then you can make a choice, because without alternative, there is no choice. So that's where we are, and that's what I wanted to give you as an introduction. I hope maybe the next questions will help the audience understand more, but I will pause here if you agree with me, Pencho.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.